What's going on, Art Dudes? Art Dude Sas here. You can just call me Sas. I hope everyone is having a great day. And today we have a follow-up to my previous video in this series of how I tackle drawing portraits. Last time I did Gage from Borderlands 2 with a front view. This time I have Cammy from Street Fighter 6 in a profile view. Okay, and I'm just going to go over the relationships of the features and how I go about tackling this very challenging perspective, because a lot of people know how to draw a face from the front, but a lot of people struggle drawing a face from a 3/4 view or a side view, and I find my lack of experience with side view and 3/4 view a bit lacking. So I have this video to show how I tackle this hard subject. So first off, we point out all the landmarks. We draw a box similar to the size of this image, right? And then we point out the landmarks. So I even illustrate the landmarks. So here we have the hairline, right? We have the top of the ear. So the top of the eyebrows will most of the time be at the top of the ear. There are exceptions, right? And then another important landmark is the eye is always a little ways down. The space for the eye is always a little ways down from the top of the ear. It varies on your ear shape and things like that, but I always like to make this landmark because it sets in stone where the eye can be. The bottom of the nose goes to the bottom of the ear, and the bottom of the mouth, or the bottom lip, will be somewhere around the neck. This is different for everyone, so it's best to just measure it out. And what I also showcase right here is the relationship between the nose and the chin. Always keep this in mind when drawing the nose and the chin. This is something I kind of messed up on and I had to fix later on in the drawing, is this space, this gap, this dividing line, this diagonal line between the nose and the chin, and also the nose and the mouth and the chin, the nose and the forehead, things like that. So we're just mapping things out, rough shapes. Just want to lay in the big shapes first before going into any detail. I did make the box a little shorter. I even put in a 3/4, a 2-point perspective box to show for her shoulder and her body. Just rough it in. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It's just the beginning. You'll refine it as the drawing goes on. Right here, I noticed that the lips were too far forward, so I moved them back. But the problem is I moved the lips back, which means I didn't move the chin back as well. Just some rough shape estimates for the shading, detailing the ear. For the ear, you always want this sort of Y shape, this deep Y shape, right? And then you just want to follow it into the ear canal right here. And then when you have this, the second part, the outer part of the ear, it always kind of connects to nothing. Like it connects to the outer edge of the ear, but it always kind of connects to nothing. So I kind of represent it like that. Here is where I measure the space from the skull cavity, the space from the skull into the eye. And we measure that space to see how far it is. And since I already have the estimate for how far the eye should go down, it's quite easy to place where the eye is. I drew, you didn't see it, I kind of sped past it. I drew a plumb line, I think it's what it's called, from that cavity right here, the space right here, down to check and see how far the mouth is away and that they're in line with each other, right? So using plumb lines is what they're called will also help you a lot. I use them a lot in my drawings too. So here I kind of fix up the box. Fix up the box down here. I fix up the... Yep, move it down a little bit further. Yeah, the lips aren't really that great at the beginning. Just some rough estimates. I like to roughly estimate everything in the first layer and then clean everything up in the second and then do a final pass through in the third layer. So now we're at the second pass through. Like I mentioned in my first video, what I like to do is I duplicate the first layer of the sketch I made. I hide the duplicate layer, and then I select the original layer, soft erase it. I lock it. I lock both of these so I don't actually draw on them, and then I make another layer, which will serve as the second pass through for my drawing. And then I do the same thing for the second layer. Second layer, I duplicate it. I hide the duplicate. I go back to the original second layer, soft erase it. Add another layer on top of the duplicate, lock both the duplicate and the original, and then I start on my third pass through. It just helps. I don't like using a lot of layers in my drawing. I always recommend doing a second or third pass through. You're never going to get things right on the first layout of the drawing. I'm mainly just following what my guidelines have, and I'm flicking back and forth. If you saw that, I flick back and forth between the base layer, the first layer, and the second layer right there, because I want to see how faithfully I'm sticking to the base sketch and to see which things need to be fixed and which things don't need to be fixed. Flipping through will help flipping back and forth will help your artwork a lot. Plus, on a second pass through, you can ignore the sketchy lines. I'll still make my second layer fairly sketchy, but in a more controlled manner, so I can kind of avoid the mess that was the first layer and kind of refine it into a more cohesive picture, so I can start putting my shading and things like that for the third layer. So right there, I started on my third layer. I can see here, first layer, get a duplicate, soft erased, drew over it, and then I did that for the third layer too. So here's my original layer, made a duplicate, I hid the duplicate, I went back to the third layer and soft erased it, locked it, and then I made a layer above the duplicate so I can draw over. So now that I have basically all the landmarks, I can now go over in a lighter touch everything that I drew and just refine it even further for a final pass through. I mess with the nose a lot. The angle of the nose is something you'll find tough, and what I find tough in a lot of side view drawings is sometimes they have like really like upturned noses, quote unquote feminine noses. Sometimes they have really masculine noses, and it's up to you as an artist to understand that angle and how far you want the nose to kind of go into the skull and make that cavity, that dip. Because noses are just a bunch of cartilage. There's, barely any muscle there. So a lot of the defining characteristics of a nose kind of depend on the shading. Just detailing. Sometimes I forget to add details in the first and second pass through, then I have to kind of make it up in the third pass through. So for the eye, I kind of did this more shortened shape where it's a sharp turn for the first section, a less steep turn for the second, and then a diagonal line for the third. And drawing an eye from the side view is kind of weird because in this picture, it isn't just a, you know, a like Pac-Man symbol, what do you call it, a less than symbol or a greater than symbol. It's more of a 3/4 view shot of the eye. So you have to kind of improvise. So what I did was I put 3 parts. Usually it's 1, 2, 3. And then you have a big dividing line for the first one and then a second one up here. But I decided to make it 3 to kind of round it out. Add the eyelash. I'll go into depth more about how to draw the standalone facial features in future videos. You also have to be careful right here because it looks a little weird if you just have the full jawline defined, which is why we have shading to help define that. So when you connect the jawline to the neck, you have to kind of selectively choose which parts are showing and which parts are not, which I do in the latter half of the drawing. I just lightly go over everything, and once I lightly go over everything, I go in a deeper line weight. I put some more pressure on my pen. And later on in the drawing, I choose when to add line weight and when not to add line weight. I fixed the lips here. Drawing the lips protruding like this is like a first for me. And it's kind of hard. Because lips, just like noses, are like... The bottom lip is more of a form than it is like anything else. So it's hard to kind of define it. So what I did right here was I made a separate layer on top of the final layer. And that's where I do my shading. Usually I'll do 2 layers on top of the separate layer. I will do a first separate layer just to draw the lines out, like here. I'll draw the lines out separately, and then I'll do a second layer on top of that for it to shade. And then after I'm done shading, I'll go back to the first separate layer for the shading in and just delete it. And then I'll manually define the lines selectively based on what I want to show. So that's exactly what I did. Here's my shadows, defining shapes of my shadows, and here's the actual shading. I was messing with a lot of sensitivity stuff. I kind of reset my Autodesk Sketchbook program, and I had to mess with shading with the pressure sensitivity. So right here, I'm trying to showcase the form, and by using curved lines with some heavy pressure sensitivity. I don't think it looked that great, but all about experimentation at the end. And I kind of fixed some of these. I don't showcase it in the video itself, but I went back a little bit after I drew this and I fixed it in this area in the final posting when I posted it to YouTube and Newgrounds. For the shading stuff, I just followed the direction, right? So the direction of the jawline is this way. So I go this way. Jawline goes up here. I go up here. I think I fixed this part of the jawline later. You just follow with line hatch, cross hatching and hatching. You just follow the direction of the form itself, and you're not gonna know how to do that until you actually draw real life portraits and you kind of know how the forms work in real life. Here's an example of me selectively getting rid of the shading lines and then emphasizing what I want to show right here and up here. I think it looks a little bit weird if the eyebrows are just pure lines, and I think it's weird if the eyebrows are also just purely outlined. Same with the shadow shapes, right? What I do is I go in a darker pressure sensitivity and I just outline it little by little to showcase that yes, there's still a shadow shape here, and that I want it to be known that it's still a line drawing, right? Not purely, you know, some realism type thing, right? Because it looks a little bit weird if it's pure realism in the way I draw. And so you kind of define the shadow shapes with more of a darker line weight. Here, right? Diagonal lines for shading. Diagonal lines and then diagonal lines right here. Here I used curved cross hatching for the shading. I think I fixed this later on in the drawing. I don't know if I fixed it in the video. I don't really like the way that looks. I kind of messed with the hair too. What I did here was I just did a bunch of crisscrossing lines to showcase the various ways the hair would go. But I thought that looked really weird, so I erased it. And then I made a separate layer. And what I like to do is... I think I erase it. Yes. Okay. What I like to do is, if I don't like the way something looks, it's already on a separate layer. I'll make it on a separate layer before I tackle anything like big. And what I do is I make it a separate layer. I keep it. I don't erase it outright, but I make a separate layer from that one, and then I just test things out. So this one I did more of a cross hatching in different directions with darker line weights to show the darkening of the hair over here and over here. I think it looked a lot better. Although, even though it looked a lot better, it also provided conflicts with the whatever this is, her clothing down here. So it's kind of a win-lose situation. I think the hair looked better, but it conflicted with these straps right here. Should have just done one clean. I wanted to showcase the breaks and direction, but I didn't really showcase it that often. I think if I showcased the breaks and direction, it would have looked a little better. Would have been able to differentiate it. I think I fix it down here because it's not going the right way. Same here for the shading. Since we're looking at a curved form, just curve the hatching there. I always leave the eyes for last. I always struggle with drawing the pupils and stuff like that. What do I do next? I think I took a little bit of a break here. Yeah. Okay, I fixed the nose. Yeah. I'm trying to draw the the bottom of the nose selectively, picking and choosing what I want. I think I made her scar a little bit too big. Maybe. I don't know. Can't really have everything accurate. Here's where I try to fix the nose. I try to make it a bit more sloping. If it bothered you the entire drawing that the nose was a little bit too straight, I think I make it a little bit more diagonal, more cutting into the skull cavity. Yeah. It's a little longer than the actual drawing, but that's all right. So here's what I talk about when I say the selective shadow shapes. Is the jawline looks weird when it's fully connected. So what I do is I darken it up, darken this part up, darken this part up, and I just selectively go over and darken the line weight for the shadow shapes. It looks a little bit better, at least in my eyes. Just use normal hatching for the eyes. Yeah. For the final portion of the drawing, I always go over in a darker line weight what I want to showcase. So for her, the main appeal is her face. So I go over the outer edge of the drawing with a darker line weight to emphasize her face and for your eyes to draw attention to her face. Like, yes, her shoulder, made her shoulder maybe a little bit too muscular. I like muscular shoulders though. And you know, this part is cool, but it's really her face that's the main draw of the portrait, right? Because it's a portrait. I feel like I could have gone a little bit darker with the outlines. Sometimes I don't really know what to do with the darker outlines. Some portraits I don't really know what to do. That's pretty much it. So let's do a little bit of a time lapse, right? The important thing is getting the measurements right, because if the measurements are even, like, your measurements can be slightly off and the picture will be fine as a result. Like this picture did here. I made the box a little bit too small, I think, and I drew her shoulder a little bit too high, and then I kind of just lowered everything and everything just worked out in the end. But it's important to get the measurements right, and it's always important to do a lot of pass-throughs, especially in a side view. A lot of things can go wrong in a side view. So just get the box, you know, get the box, and just line up the facial features. And not everything is going to be accurate. Not your eyebrows aren't going to always be at the top of your ears, or your nose is going to be at the bottom of the ears, right? So it's important to adjust your box. Changes can be made later on, like here I fixed the nose a little bit. I made it a little bit deeper into the skull, but it's more important that you catch this stuff early on, right? Not everybody's perfect, but that's basically how I tackle a drawing in the side view. I plan to do a video on how I tackle 3/4 view, and I want to cover the various facial features as well, such as lips, noses, eyes, ears, etc. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. I hope all goes well on your art journey, and I hope everyone has a very great day. Thank you.